All right, so we have with us tonight Rick Graffagna. Rick is the owner-operator of Senior Solutions. Over the course of the past 9+ years, Senior Solutions has helped hundreds of families navigate the many options of senior housing, helping them connect with the best options for their circumstances with their free service. He has developed a vast amount of knowledge as it pertains to the senior housing industry and is recognized as a leader in the industry. In addition, Rick has played a pivotal role serving on the boards of several organizations, including the Association of Senior Service Providers Naperville, Lyle Triad as secretary, and Continuity of Care Alpha Chapter current president. Rick has also been thrilled to be a sponsor at several Alzheimer's walks. Well, Rick Graffagna, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Christina.
Hi. Oh, I forgot to mention, Rick is totally fine answering questions during the presentation. So I will monitor the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the moment that it comes into your mind, or else you might forget, because we don't want to have to wait until the very end. He will answer them throughout. So go ahead.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for the introduction, Christina. And thank you, everybody, for taking a little time out of your Monday evening to be with us. Again, my name is Rick. I'm with Senior Solutions, and tonight we're going to speak to Senior Housing 101, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Let me apologize for I appear to be kind of dark on the screen. Unfortunately, just an hour ago, the light behind me in my office went out, and I have not had a chance to change that fixture out. So I'm a little darker than what I normally. Actually, I look like I have a wonderful tan, don't you think? Anyway, so why don't we get started? And so if you don't mind, I'd like to get going with a little bit of a humorous story. At least I think it's humorous. So bear with me a little bit. So there was this group of senior citizens that were going out on an excursion, on an event. They were going to see some museums in downtown. And they had just left on the bus ride, and one of the female attendees walked up to the bus driver while they were driving and tapped him on the shoulder and asked him if he would care to have some peanuts. And the bus driver said, "Yeah, I love peanuts. That'd be great." So he reached out his hand and she gave him a handful of peanuts. And so he munched them down. And excuse me, a few minutes later, she walked back up to him and tapped him on the shoulder, and the same thing occurred. And he ate down the peanuts, and this repeated itself like 3 or 4 more times. Finally, the woman approached the bus driver and tapped him on the shoulder, and he said, "You know, I really appreciate the peanuts, and they taste great, but I don't want to eat all your peanuts. I mean, you spent your hard-earned money, on them." And she goes, "Oh, that's okay. We really can't eat the peanuts because they're too hard on our teeth. And so we can't really eat them anyway." And he goes, "Well, that's too bad. And I appreciate the peanuts, but why would you buy peanuts if you couldn't eat them?" And she goes, "Well, we really enjoy the chocolate that's around the peanuts." But a bump. Anyway, so hopefully somebody's chuckling a little bit or snickering at least a little bit at home. So why don't we move on? So this is my first slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about retirement communities and some different financial models that are out there, which some of it you may already be familiar with. So the first type of financial model I want to speak to is what we call a buy-in. Okay, so a buy-in senior community is one where there's a pretty healthy, typically 6-figure level upfront investment that you need to make in order to gain access to that community. It's not a real estate play. You're not purchasing a piece of property or buying a deed or anything, but you're gaining access to the various levels of care that we're going to speak to a little bit that's in that community. So what do you get for your buy-in? Well, first of all, the level of the buy-in will be determined by the community that you're at, and also by the size and style of the apartment that you want. It could be the smallest 1-bedroom that you're interested in to perhaps the largest 2 or 3 bedroom with a den and a balcony. And so that buy-in amount will be determined based off of that apartment. And when you make the buy-in, there's typically a percentage associated with it. Could be 50%, could be 80%, could be 90%. And what that percentage means is that at the time that you leave that community, whether you leave under your own volition, you've decided to move somewhere else or relocate to another part of the country, or unfortunately you pass away while you live there, that percentage of that upfront amount is either returned to you personally or to your estate for your beneficiaries. So for example, if the upfront buy-in amount was $200,000 and your model was a 90% buy-in, then there would be $180,000 that would be released to your estate or to you. So what are some of the other things that are beneficial for being in a buy-in type of community? One would be that you gain priority access to the other levels of care that are there. And so if there's a waiting list, you would be ahead of and be more of a priority to gain access over someone that may be coming in directly off the street. Sometimes there's a financial benefit to that, where there's either fixed rates that have already been determined, or there's a percentage discount that's available to you because you started out as a buy-in resident of this community. Another thing that can happen in some communities is that you may have purchased what they call a life care plan, or there may be a benevolent trust that's been set up, which essentially says that if at some point you're no longer able to financially pay the monthly fee or rent for the housing that you're living in, that life care plan or that benevolent fund will allow you to stay there, through the end of your life. And so that's a safety net, right? So you wouldn't necessarily have to leave there to go to another type of community. So that's a buy-in community. Next is what we call a community fee or a rental type of property. For these type of communities, it's a much lower entry fee. Could be $2,000, could be $4,000. It's a one-time fee, gains you access to the community. There's, just like the buy-in, there's a monthly fee or rent that's associated with the apartment that you select. But in the community fee properties, there's a lot of flexibility. By law in the state of Illinois, you are able to give a 30-day notice to that community. And at that point, your financial responsibility comes to an end. So it's not like your typical market rate apartment, where if you sign a 12-month lease, you're financially liable for that, irregardless if you decide to move. In the senior housing community, you've got the latitude to give that notification, and you're no longer financially responsible. And then finally, there's what we call affordable housing or low-income housing. These are typically under the HUD umbrella, or you may have heard the term Section 8 or voucher housing, where this is less than market rate apartments geared towards seniors, typically for those that are independent. Most times there's not any services that are available in this type of housing. And for those that need this housing and who are in that kind of financial situation, it can be a great option. One of the challenges with affordable housing, quite honestly, is supply. The demand is much higher than the supply that's out there, and you'll oftentimes find that there's a pretty significant wait list to get into this type of housing. Okay, Christine, any questions at this point, or are we good to go?
Looks like we're good to go.
Sounds great. So next I want to talk about different types of retirement housing that are out there. First one would be independent living. Okay, and pretty much as it's described with a title, independent living is someone that's independent, don't really have any personal care needs, they're still driving, very ambulatory, they may still be working, maybe have a full-time job or a part-time job, and they've decided to go into retirement housing. So independent living apartment could be a 1-bedroom, could be a 2-bedroom, in some cases might be a 3-bedroom apartment, comes with a full kitchen. And the reason that it comes with a full kitchen is that meals are available in a dining room, served restaurant style in this type of housing, but typically is not 3 meals a day. And so either by your choice, you decide that you don't want to eat that day for a particular meal, or when the meal isn't available, you can prepare that food in your own kitchen. So your base rent gets you access to that meal plan. It gets you maintenance and housekeeping, laundry facilities. There might be a washer and dryer in your apartment, or if not readily in your apartment, is easy access, on the same floor. Wi-Fi and utilities are all included in your base rent. There's typically daily activities and programming that you have access to. If you're not driving or don't necessarily want to drive all the time, there's local transportation that can be either for medical appointments, or they may go on shopping excursions, or there may be special events where they're going to go to a movie or to a theater or out to a restaurant to share a meal. And so that's what's typically included in your independent living apartment. They're unfurnished, so you bring your own furniture and decorations because this is your new home. So you want to make this as comfortable and as familiar as possible. Okay. So next is what I call independent living with services. Now here's a situation where you may or may not be familiar with this something called activities of daily living. Excuse me one second. So activities of daily living, or ADLs, are things like bathing, dressing, grooming, mobility support, help in the restroom, medication reminders, things of that nature, right? And so let's say you're living in your independent living apartment and life throws you a curveball. Okay, let's say you injure your shoulder, and it's very difficult and challenging for you to get dressed and ready to go in the morning, maybe undressed at night to be ready for bed. And so now you need someone to come in and help you with that activity of daily living, or that ADL. So in that particular case, you can either hire an outside agency to provide a caregiver to come in and help you with that, or in some cases, your IL community where you live can provide that person to come in for an extra fee to help you with that activity. Another example might be, let's say now you've got a little mobility issues taking place and you're just a little uncomfortable stepping into and out of the shower. You can still bathe yourself, but you just would like to have somebody there to make sure that you go into the shower and get out of the shower safely. So in this example, the same thing can occur. You can hire an outside agency to have somebody come in and provide that help to you, or you can have hire a caregiver that's an employee of the property that you live. That can work really well as long as the help that you need can be scheduled. Okay, you can schedule a medication reminder, you can schedule a shower assist, you can schedule someone to help come and get you get dressed and undressed through the course of the day. If at some point the totality of your needs are such that you're never quite certain when you're going to need help, and it can't always be scheduled ahead of time, then you're in a situation where you maybe need to transition to an assisted living apartment. Now that assisted living apartment very likely is going to be in the same community where you're already living. It could be a separate floor that's been designated for assisted living. It could be a wing of the property. It could be a separate building. In some small number of circumstances, it could be the same apartment. There's a handful of properties that have dual licensing, and so that they can bring full level of care or support for your personal care items right to that same apartment. So what's an assisted living apartment look like? Excuse me. It could look very much like your IL apartment. Could be a studio, could be a 1-bedroom, some cases could be a 2-bedroom apartment. One typical difference is that in an assisted living apartment, they generally have kitchenettes versus full kitchens. So a kitchenette is going to be an area that's got cabinets and countertop. There's going to be a sink. There's going to be a refrigerator. You can have a microwave, sometimes a hot plate or a coffee pot, typically, but they don't have a full kitchen. And one of the reasons you don't have a full kitchen is that with assisted living, that base rent that you pay includes 3 meals a day. okay? And not just the meal plan that's existing in independent living. So your rent gets you many of the same things that as for your IL apartment. Gets you utilities, gets you housekeeping, it gets you maintenance. One of the differences, it gets you laundry. Laundry is typically done for an assisted living apartment. And you have programming and you have activities and you have local transportation. In these type of communities, there are doctors that are available. They don't necessarily have their office there, but they do rounds. And so it could be gerontologists, could be a neurologist, audiologist, podiatrists that come in. There are nurses on staff. The nurses typically are responsible for the caregivers and primarily responsible for any medication management that needs to take place. So in assisted living, there's typically two different buckets of the cost. One bucket is the rent, which we've spoken to already. The second is for the cost of care. And anybody that's moving into an assisted living apartment, you will be assessed, and they're going to kind of determine A, are you a good fit for their community? And B, what is the totality of the help that you need? What are all of the activities of daily living that you need help with in order to get through the day safely? And that's very personalized. That's unique to you, okay? And so that care plan is put together, and that care plan ends up being a cost. And so you have the rent and the cost of care that combined, those two pieces put together are what your monthly fee would look like. So what if there's a couple and you're either moving into your independent living apartment or your assisted living apartment? The rent isn't doubled. It's what they call a second person fee. And so that would be in addition to the base rent. There'd be a second person fee, and essentially it's a cost of food, all right? The other thing that's available in these communities is therapy. Let's say that you've had a slip and fall and your doctor prescribes some physical therapy and some occupational therapy for you. There are licensed agencies within these communities that can provide that help for you and that therapy, typically covered under Medicare Part B, and they might have their own therapy gym in the building, or they may bring that therapy right to you in your individual apartment. Okay? Next is what we call memory care. All right, so memory care are for those residents that have been diagnosed with a form of dementia. They have a cognitive shortfall, which means that they may need a little bit more assistance and some oversight. So memory care, can either be right within the same community that you're already residing. It could be a floor, it could be a wing that's been devoted to memory care. Or there are memory care communities that are standalone. They're separate operators, and that's what their specialty is. That's all that they do is memory care. That's 100% of their focus. So what's some of the distinctions and differences of memory care? First, typically the studios, the apartment style is a studio. They have a tendency to be a little smaller than your IL and your assisted living apartments. They only would have kitchenettes, and in a lot of cases, they don't have kitchenettes. 3 meals a day come with your memory care setting. The reason the apartments are smaller is that there's really strong encouragement to have the residents that are in a memory care setting not spend a lot of time in their apartment, but to be out in the community, to be mingling with the other residents, to be participating in the activities and the programming. The caregivers and the support staff that work in memory care are specially trained. They've been received a lot of additional help to understand how to work with people that have cognitive deficits, to deal effectively with behavioral issues, to know how to redirect people, when some of those behaviors may be starting to exhibit themselves. A lot of times adult children will ask me, well, gee, if mom and dad have been identified to have dementia and is being diagnosed, do they automatically have to go to memory care? No, that's not the case at all. There are many, many people that are living very well in assisted living, as long as it's early stage or mid-stage dementia. If it starts to advance, it may be much more beneficial for them to be in a smaller, quieter setting of memory care where they're going to have more better programming that allows them to feel like they can be successful participating in that programming. And then the other thing is that as soon as there's some exit seeking or wandering, that really is, kind of a deal breaker for being in your more traditional assisted living setting. Someone needs really to transition to memory care, which is a secured environment, which is a much more safety oriented and keeps someone safe within that community setting. Okay, Christine, any questions at this point?
No, I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but just want to remind people they can type those in there, and I'll type a question into the chat so people can see where to go.
Okay, very good. So moving on from memory care, the next type of senior community is what we call a CCRC, or a continuing care retirement community. You may have heard that term before, and typically that is a type of community that's associated with, from our first slide, a buy-in community, okay? And at a CCRC, they typically have the full continuum of care level available to you on that same campus. So that's independent living with services, assisted living, memory care, and oftentimes skilled nursing, all on that same property. Okay, and when like in the buy-in scenario, when I was describing that, and I talked about people transitioning from one level of care to the other, that's really what I was speaking to. Someone transitioning as life changes for them to the area that would be most appropriate for them to be living in. Next is supportive living. Okay, now supportive living is a great Illinois only type of option for seniors 65 years and up. Supportive living is standalone buildings. They are senior apartments, could be studio, could be one bedroom. Excuse me, they're unfurnished. So again, you bring your own furnishings. They have kitchenettes versus full kitchens. You have a base rent, which gets you, all of the things we talked about before: 3 meals a day, housekeeping, maintenance, laundry, activities and programming, things of that nature. Care is provided potentially for seniors that are living in supportive living. And very similar to independent living with services, there's some, as long as the care can be scheduled, you can be appropriate to live in supportive living. There's some mobility requirements to be in a SLIF for supportive living. Someone needs to be able to stand and to pivot, and even if that's to stand and to pivot to get to use a walker or to get to use a wheelchair, you really need to be able to navigate your apartment. So essentially, so you can get to the restroom to take care of your toileting needs. Okay, so that's a little bit different than assisted living, where assisted living is truly 24/7 care. Okay, whenever you need help, you can push a button or pull a cord, and someone is going to be able to be there to help you. That level of care is really not available to you in supportive living. So that, from a care standpoint, that's a distinctive difference that's available to you in supportive living. The other thing that's very different is all of the other levels of care that we had spoken to before: independent living, IL with services, assisted living, and memory care. They are private pay only. Okay, and we'll talk to where that money can come from here in a few minutes, but it's private pay. In supportive living, there's a portal or the ability to transition to Medicaid or public aid and stay in living there. So let's say you don't have the money to pay the base rent and care costs in supportive living, or at some point you've exhausted those financial resources and now you can no longer afford that monthly fee. You can apply for Medicaid, and Medicaid will be the payer for you to stay living there. It's a beautiful, wonderful program for people that fall, into that kind of set of circumstances. Next is affordable senior housing. I kind of mentioned that before. Kind of a short supply of this type of housing, but for those in need and really need that kind of apartment style living, it can be a great solution for you. Skilled nursing, rehab or long-term. You have skilled nursing properties that are standalone, and you also have skilled nursing properties that are part of the CCRCs that I mentioned to you before. People live in skilled nursing for a couple of reasons, or they might be at skilled nursing for a couple of reasons. One would be rehabilitation, right? Perhaps you slipped and fell and you broke your hip. You're in the hospital for a few days, 3 days, 3 midnights, and now they're discharging you, but they're not discharging you to your home. They're discharging you to skilled nursing to get some short-term rehabilitation, paid for by Medicare. Ultimately could be eligible for up to 100 days of rehabilitation. Not too often these days do people get to use those full 100 days. Right now, it's more like, the average stay is 14 to 20 days. The first 20 days of short-term rehabilitation are paid for 100% by Medicare. The remaining days would be paid for 80% by Medicare, and then 20% would be paid for by your supplemental insurance under Medicare. Another reason that someone might be in skilled nursing, that might be someone's new home. Perhaps someone lived in assisted living and they no longer have the ability to pay privately for there. Then they may need to transition to a skilled nursing property that accepts Medicaid, and you're there long term. That's your new home. And then a third reason that someone might be in skilled nursing for long term is that they financially may have the ability to continue to pay assisted living, but now their needs fall outside the bounds of what by license assisted living can do. There's really just a small number of reasons or physical maladies, if you will, that someone is dealing with that cannot be treated with in assisted living. And those might be, let's say, on a feeding tube, on a respirator, a ventilator, IV medication, a level 3 or 4 wound, some pretty significant issues taking place. Short of that, your needs can be managed very appropriately in assisted living. If you end up having a high level wound, unfortunately, assisted living cannot manage that, and then you would need to transition to skilled nursing. The other thing that I forgot to mention earlier relative to the assisted living scenario, it really can be an end-of-life solution for somebody. Hospice can be brought in. The level of care that you can receive when you're on hospice is greater than if you're not on hospice and still living in assisted living. So it can truly be an end-of-life scenario for you. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So some things to consider when you're thinking about transitioning from where you currently live or reside to to senior housing, excuse me. One would be location, right? Typically that really rises to the top of the list. Someone wants to be closer to where they've lived for the past 30, 40, 50 years. They want to stay closer to their church, familiar shopping, family and friends that might be right there, doctors' offices and the like. So location is really important. Sometimes you maybe want to move closer to where your kids are. Want a safety net of having family that perhaps has moved away from you. Maybe they're still in the same general suburbs, but you want to get closer to where they're at. Or perhaps you've already relocated yourself. 25 years ago, you moved to Florida. You wanted to move to sunshine state. Easy for me to say, right? But now life's throwing you some curveballs, and perhaps you want to relocate back to the Chicagoland area. You want to get closer to familiar grounds and where family can be there to support you. Next, a key consideration is, what are the levels of care that are available to you? Are you starting to get up there in age and you want to move out of your house and you want to move into independent living? Perhaps you're independent right now, but you don't know what's down the road for you. You know, for none of us, we really don't know what's around the corner. And so now is the time to understand, you know, to move somewhere that perhaps, even though you don't need that level of help today, maybe down the road, you're going to need assisted living. Maybe there's some early onset dementia that's starting to be noticed with you, or you've got a history of dementia in your family that perhaps you want to go to a community that has a memory care offering as an option. So level of care is an important ingredient. Lifestyle and amenities. What do they do for fun? This is your new home. You know, so, you know, if they go on trips, what do they do? You know, what kind of activities they do? What kind of games and programming takes place in the building? You know, are you exercise? Are you an avid exerciser? Do they have facilities for you to go and continue doing that? What kind of amenities do they have? You know, a small number of properties may have swimming pools. Maybe you're an avid swimmer and you want to continue to do that. You know, so that's an important consideration. Cost obviously is always a factor, right? And I always ask people to not only consider what the current costs are, but to have a good understanding of what the cost may look like down the road. So I'm in independent living right now. Well, if I want to start bringing some care in, what would that cost look like? If I have to transition to assisted living down the road, what do those costs look like? Just so you have, from a planning standpoint, of an understanding of what that level of cost might be. Food. Who enjoys food? You know, maybe by show of hands. If we were in person, I'd ask you to raise your hand, right? So for me, food's important. And quite honestly, the food in these communities is really, really good. Okay, it's prepared on site, virtually 100% from scratch. It changes on a regular basis. There's specialties. You know, there may be specialty for the month or a special for the day. The food, generally speaking, is really good. I remember a number of years ago, I was working with a young lady who was 94 at the time. Her name was Dorothy, and we were going out to visit a couple of properties. And Dorothy goes, "Well, before we go," she asked, "Is the food good where we're going?" And I said, "Well, yeah, the food's good, Dorothy. Why do you ask?" And she said, "Well, when you're 94, you don't have much else to look forward to. The food needs to be good. So the food is good." You know, kind of ties into the lifestyle, but you know, what kind of activities takes place in the community you're thinking of? What kind of outings are there? What's the local transportation options look like? Do they transport to for medical appointments? Perhaps you're someone that's on dialysis and you need to have your dialysis 3 times a week. Can they provide that kind of assistance for you to get there and to return back home? I think this is an important question to ask when you're visiting communities. You know, what does the staff look like? Are there any outside hires there, or are they all employees of the property that you're living at? What about the management team? How long has they been there? How long has the executive director been there? The key department heads? And what's the staffing levels look like during the day and at night? You know, ask what that caregiver to resident ratio looks like in assisted living and in memory care. What's the nursing coverage like? Is there a nurse in the building, you know, 24 hours a day? Buildings and grounds. You know, your tour, when you go to visit a property, begins the moment you pull into that parking lot. So what does it look like? Is it well maintained? Is it clean? Is it well striped? You know, during the nicer weather, is what's the landscaping look like? During the not so nice weather, is the ice and the snow been removed well? When you're walking through the building, what's the common areas look like? Are they well lit? You know, is it well painted? Is the floors clean? Is the carpeting look like it's been changed in recent times? You know, what kind of pride does it look like do they have in their community? Oh, look, I put food in there again. I apologize, because for me personally, food is important. Security and safety. You know, what's access to the building look like? Are there hours? When does somebody at the front desk, at the concierge area? You know, so what hours are they there? If you get there after hours. Perhaps you pick up mom and you brought her to your home for a meal and you bring her back and now the doors are locked. How do you gain access to the building? If you want to come in and visit after hours, how do they do that? Do they provide a fob for you to get in or a passcode to get into a key entry? Or do you call a phone number and one of the nurses or caregivers on staff come in and let you in? What kind of safety measures do they take? Do they do fire drills? Are there emergency weather drills that they do? These are all good questions to ask when you're visiting a community. And then, this kind of ties back to, item 2. For none of us, it's difficult to look down the road and to understand what may or may not happen. But, to the degree that this first move can be the one that lasts the longest and hopefully is the only next move that someone has to make, I think that's important to think about what your future needs might be and will they be addressed where you're at. Christine, any questions? I see something that's popped up in chat or Q&A.
Yes. Yeah, we did have something in Q&A. So Mary wants to know, she would love some suggestions of websites or sources that you found helpful to find retirement communities in the area.
Sure. I'm going to speak a little bit to that towards the end of the program, but that's a great question, Mary. Okay.
Okay.
So I oftentimes get asked by adult children mostly, so when is it time to move? Okay. And that question varies dramatically from one situation to the next. It primarily becomes a family decision, including the senior, and you weigh, the options that are out there, will vary significantly, it really depends on what the situation is that's taking place, with the family. Invariably, safety is a key factor to this, right? Perhaps, when I tell the adult kids, if you're having trouble sleeping at night because you're wondering if dad got up in the middle of the night, he's had some mobility issues, perhaps there's been some fall history, and you're wondering if he got up in the middle of the night to go to the restroom to take care of his knees. Did he do that safely? Did he get back into bed, without an incident? If that's starting to bother you a lot, maybe now's the time to more strongly consider, a move. Sometimes family geography dictates that. The kids are all, 25 minutes, 45 minutes away, difficult to be there all the time to help. Perhaps, the example that I gave earlier that, mom and dad have moved away and now life has changed for them and they need to get back to be closer to family, where that safety net and that support, so the support network is more readily available. I'm working with a family right now where dad moved to Florida 15 years ago. He's unfortunately has had a decline. He's moved back up with his daughter to be close to her and until his house gets sold. And when that takes place, we've already identified a senior community where he's going to go and live. And sometimes cost comes into play. We're going to speak a little bit later about in-home care. I'm a very strong proponent for aging in place. Personally, I have my 92-year-old mom who's still independent, living in the original house. And so we've been blessed. But if at some point, she needs help, we're going to probably start by bringing some in-home care in. Well, cost of in-home care, it's not inexpensive. And at some point, the amount of care that you're paying for to keep someone at home may actually end up being more expensive than that assisted living option might be. So again, cost may be a factor that helps stimulate a stronger consideration for the move. So I'm sure you're wondering, you may have seen, I don't know if you read in the paper, there's this COVID thing that's taken place over the last year or two. So virtually all communities that I know of and that I'm working with are open for business. They're accepting new move-ins. People are able to tour. There's going to be some screening at the front, a temperature check, and some questions you have to answer, and you have to wear a mask. But you can typically tour the property without many restrictions. I mentioned earlier that there's an assessment process that takes place to make sure that someone's appropriate to move into a senior community. That assessment typically is done by a nurse. More and more, they're back to being done face-to-face, but perhaps it's for geographical reasons. Dad's down in Florida, so there may be a virtual tour that's done in order to complete this assessment. The move-in process has been slightly modified compared to maybe the way it used to be, but focuses on safety, some guidelines that are given to the people that are moving you in. Very, very few new residents are going to be isolated now when they move in. They're going to be asked to be COVID tested. They're going to be asked if they've been vaccinated. But that typical way it was like 6 months ago, where someone moves in and they had to be isolated in their apartment for a period of time, those days are pretty much behind us now. Family visitation greatly increased. There's some limitations depending on the current COVID scenario in a property, but pretty much family visitations are allowed, and you're allowed to leave the property with your loved one, whether it's for a quick visit home or maybe a weekend away or for a family gathering, and you can come back without restrictions. Employee and resident health continues to be monitored closely. Activities and group dining, social distancing in some cases, but they're back to being allowed. A tremendous high percentage of residents and staff are vaccinated. Way over 95% of residents are typically vaccinated. Some communities are mandating that their staff be vaccinated. So it's a much different environment today than it was 6 months ago, 9 months ago. What's the future hold? Well, if I knew that, I'd be making a lot more money somewhere else, but we'll see. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way that it was a year ago or so, but any variations that will probably, instead of being across the board, will be more unique to an individual property. So what type of payments are accepted? I mentioned earlier, private pay. Medicaid public aid comes into place in two different scenarios that I mentioned. One would be supportive living, and the second would be a Medicaid bed in a skilled nursing facility. Medicare, I'm not going to spend much time talking about Medicare, but Medicare continues. Unfortunately, Medicare does not help pay for housing for a senior, but what it pays for today will continue to be paid for when and if you would move into senior housing. That would be hospitalization, doctor's visits, rehabilitation, prescription drugs, your Part D, all of that would continue. So how do I go about funding these payments? Your Social Security income. If you were fortunate enough to work for an organization that provided a pension for you once you left their employee, that can help. If you were able to set aside some savings and some investments, and you've got that nest egg set aside waiting for a rainy day, well, today may be that rainy day, that you need to tap into those monies. You've lived in your house, you've paid, you've developed quite an equity amount. Your mortgage is gone. You sell your home, that proceeds, and especially now where the real estate market is so hot, you can maybe even get a premium dollar for your home. But now would be the time to tap into that equity. Probably a very small percentage of the people, if anybody on this call, have long-term care insurance. Most, if not all, senior communities accept long-term care insurance, and that can be help pay for assisted living, can be help pay for in-home care, can help pay for nursing home care if needed. If you're a veteran, if you're a spouse of a veteran, there's a couple of veterans benefits that are out there. One would pay for 12 hours of home care for the veteran themselves. There's another benefit called aid in attendance that goes to both the military veteran himself or a surviving spouse. It's almost it's like a monthly pension for an individual veteran. It could be up to $1,800 a month. For a surviving spouse, it's about $1,300 a month. A lot of people, not well known, and a lot of people don't take advantage of it, but that could be a benefit that's out there for you. Talk about the value of your home. Potentially there's different lines of credit and bridge loans that can be available to tap into those resources. If you have a whole life insurance policy, and you've accumulated some cash value, there's some convertible programs now out there that can allow you to, in a sense, convert that cash into, a form of a long-term care policy. The kids, potentially the kids can help pay for your housing. So let's move on. Some other items to think about. Already spoke to veterans benefits. I can help somebody understand what those may look like for you, depending on what your situation is. Elder law and estate planning, perhaps, the plan is for you to transition to Medicaid at some point, and there's something they call a spend down, and, an elder law attorney can help you manage your estate to most effectively manage the resources that you have as you transition to Medicaid. I always ask, are there healthcare directives in place? Is there a living will? Is there a power of attorney? That's two documents. There's power of attorney for healthcare and power of attorney for property. Those two documents are used when someone is still alive, and so if at some point you no longer have capacity to make decisions on your own behalf or for your significant loved one, you want to make sure that those documents are in place and the people understand that you've entrusted to make those decisions, understand what, have guidance from you in terms of what your wishes are. And if those POAs are not in place and you'd like some help, an elder law attorney can help with that. You got the house, you need to sell it or want to sell it. Most people already know a realtor that they trust, but sometimes you need real estate services. Who's got stuff at home? I got a lot of stuff at home. My mom still has a lot of stuff at home. If the whole thought of dealing with the stuff is overwhelming and you can't get your head wrapped around that, there's some wonderful agencies and companies out there that can help with downsizing. They can help with packing. They can help with moving. They can help you, take care of managing through all of that. Excuse me a second. I mentioned earlier in-home care. I work with a lot of wonderful agencies that can provide a caregiver that's their own employee that can come in and provide all the support for your ADL that you need, non-medical. Okay, so they can't do things like take temperatures or draw blood or provide physical therapy or take blood pressure, administer medication, but they can do everything else, in terms of bathing, dressing, grooming. They can provide companionship. They can do light housekeeping, shopping, meal preparation, take someone to a medical appointment. They can do all of that. Typically, an in-home caregiver is there, either on an hourly basis, shift work, if you will, and so the cost of that is on a per hour basis. And you kind of define what the needs are in terms of what hours and what days you want help with, up to and including 24/7, where you have a caregiver that actually lives in the home. They need to be able to sleep through the night and have their own bedroom. And that's typically not costed out on an hourly basis, but is priced out on a per diem basis. Adult day services, perhaps you'd like to, have mom or dad, go somewhere through the course of the day with some oversight, of some caregivers and some managers. Adult day services can be a great service. You get lunch, there's activities, there's programming to help keep them active and safe. How do you go about locating these communities? You can do the looking yourself. Mary, we're going to kind of touch generally on the question that you had here. family and friends, they may have some input in terms of properties that they've driven by, or they may have heard, some other friends have had successful solutions with. Get on the internet, there's there's this thing called Google where you just basically say, senior housing in Bloomingdale, Illinois, and you're going to have a number of communities pop up. There's a number of senior related websites that are out there. They can be a great help. There's also some online senior placement agencies that are there. They can maybe add a little bit more of a personalized approach. And then you have some local senior placement companies. So if you don't mind, I'll give you, a 1-minute advertisement about my company. My services are free. I'm kind of like a matchmaker. Okay, so depending on what the circumstances are for a senior or a situation, whether that's geography, level of care, what's the budget look like, I help connect families with the solutions that make the most sense based off of their circumstances. My services are free. You'll never see an invoice from me. My compensation is paid for by the properties that I work with on a referral basis, which is really the vast majority of all the options that are out there. I've been doing this for nearly 10 years. And so, there's not too many communities that I'm not, familiar with. And then I can help with anything, with most of the other things that we've spoken to already, whether veterans benefits or elder law assistance or downsizing and move management or in-home care. I work with a lot of wonderful in-home care services companies that can provide a caregiver if that's what the goal is, that's what you want to accomplish. And I say this, in all honesty, my services are free. I have no problem, entertaining your questions, wanting to learn a little bit more about your situation. This is my phone number. This is my email. I am not an ambulance chaser. If you want to call and just talk out loud a little bit about your situation, and I can give you some more guidance and more specific information, I'm more than happy and willing to do that. And if that's all that you need and you're off and running to help yourself, I'm happy to do that. If you need more help and you'd like some specific information, my help includes giving you some options, scheduling tours, accompanying you on the tour if you need that to help make sure all the right questions get asked and answered. So that's really kind of the end of the program. I don't know if there's any more questions out there. Feel free to type them into the Q&A or the chat. I'm here for a few more minutes to help however I can. And hopefully you got a little more, hopefully you're a little bit smarter right now than you were an hour ago. And if that's true, then we accomplished my goals.
Wow, that's great. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, we just had a comment from Mary, and she said this was a great start, and she'll be reaching out to you. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. So I actually have a question for you, just in case anybody out there has some questions that they're typing up. Can you talk a little bit more about long-term care insurance? Is that something that you pick up like you do life insurance as a younger person, or is that you wait until a certain age for that?
Yeah, the typical, the sweet spot, if you will. Let me give you my disclaimer. I'm not an insurance broker, right? But I think the sweet spot from a cost standpoint is if your mid 40s to 55, 60 years old. Obviously, the longer you wait, the higher the cost is going to be. Typically I would work with an insurance broker that can offer you a number of different plans with different companies, so you can understand what those differences look like. And it really boils, at some point, Christina, it's dollars and cents. What can you afford? And but if you can afford something and you can get some sort of a policy in place, that's a lot better than not having anything.
Yes. Yes, in my own family, I must say, we've been very blessed and lucky that the seniors in our family have been able to move into the family home and be taken care of by the younger generations.
Yeah.
But, that's not true for every generation. Things change.
Yeah.
So I have another age-related question in regard to some of the facilities, is there a restriction on how old you can be to enter them?
In some cases, yes. Typically, it's 60 years and older, but
60.
Many communities have exceptions to that, and it's not well publicized. So that's part of the hunt, And so if especially in the memory care arena, Christina, unfortunately, I've had to work with people that have, early onset that was very significant, and I've worked with as young as 40 years old that needed memory care support. And so, so that age restriction has a tendency to not apply in the memory care world, but in independent living and assisted living, it may be there. But, that's part of the process of trying to search out to match you with the communities that make the most sense based off of what's going on.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good to know. All right. Well, if no one else has any more questions, just please remember that we are recording this presentation, and we'll have it up on the library's YouTube channel. So everyone that registered for the program, I'll send you the link when that's live, including Rick, and you all can share it with family and friends if they have questions too.
Awesome.
All right.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, Christina. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great to see you again, Rick. Take care.
Yeah, take care. Bye, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.